In his classic work, The Problems of Philosophy, Bertrand Russell offers one of the most famous defenses of philosophical inquiry. In that text, he argues that the true value of philosophy might not lie in the answers it provides, but rather in the questions it encourages us to ask. In the following module, we turn our attention to Russell's account of the value of philosophy. Let's get into Russell's characterization of philosophy, which I put on our roadmap right here. Okay, so what kinds of things does Russell say about philosophy? It's certainly a unique discipline, right? It stands out and it's different from other disciplines. How so? Do you guys remember? I wouldn't, a different branch of science, I wouldn't even characterize necessarily philosophy as science, but I know, generally you're correct, right? That this idea that once it starts to solicit definitive answers, then it becomes a completely unique or its own discipline in itself, right? So psychology are some examples, astronomy, et cetera, et cetera. I think Russell gets into that actual example, right? But as soon as you start getting something resembling definitive answers, it ceases to be philosophy, he says. So you get this idea from Russell that by definition, philosophy dabbles in things that aren't definitive, that we don't have concrete answers for. So that's right here. All right. So yeah, excellent. That's definitely one of the major things that stands out. Some other things here, and we'll get into, I guess we'll just go ahead and progress through the slides here. He says it's only indirectly valuable to those who aren't studying it, right? I would push against this a little bit. I mean, his general point is definitely appreciable. So like the products of, say, the physical sciences or these other disciplines, right? Like a calculator, okay? That's something, regardless of whether you're studying the disciplines that generate or produce the calculator, right? All of us are directly affected by those sciences insofar as we're utilizing calculators and so on, the things they produce. And the suggestion is philosophy isn't like that, right? It doesn't have as much of a direct impact, I guess you might say, on those who aren't involved in the discipline itself. So non-philosophers aren't as directly affected by the discipline as some of these other disciplines. Does that make sense? Or at least that's his suggestion. Now I would push, and I guess, okay, let me preface what I'm about to say by saying I do generally appreciate the broader point, right? There does seem to be a sense in which these other disciplines have more palpable, tangible effects, right? But if you think about it, I would argue that philosophy can still be almost just as directly valuable, all right? Let's say somebody's maybe really getting into Buddhism, for example, and they start, one of your best friends, let's say, who used to be really difficult and you would always kind of get in arguments maybe. Suddenly he or she starts studying Buddhism, starts meditating a lot, and you see this kind of shift in their demeanor, right? It really starts to affect them, and you start getting inquisitive yourself, and you're like, yo, what's gotten into you, right? And it's affecting kind of your relationship. You guys don't argue as much. You become really interested. How did you become so patient? Blah, blah, blah. You become curious yourself, and pretty soon before you know it, you're looking into Buddhism yourself. Like, how is that not affecting you? In seemingly almost just as significant of a way. I would say that it can be seemingly just as directly impactful, right? You read some of these profound philosophical theories, it can inspire people to do all kinds of significant things, right? Inspire revolutions and so on. So I get the general point, but I would argue that philosophy certainly has the ability to be, at times at least, just as directly impactful as these other disciplines. Okay, so again, one of his points, right? That it doesn't, generally speaking, seem as directly valuable to those not involved in the discipline. Okay, does that point make sense? Okay. So this kind of goes with, I would say, he mentions how the benefits of philosophy are kind of psychological or good for the mind. This kind of, I think, parallels the point about how it's not practical, or it's thought to not be practical, right? So the benefits, insofar as there are benefits, they're not like as practically obvious, right? They're goods, they're mental kinds of goods, if you will. And he says, like, a lot of people don't even have kind of an awareness, much less an appreciation of those sorts of benefits or goods. And so they're not going to appreciate then what philosophy has to offer, right? If they're only kind of aware of and appreciate practical, sort of more tangible benefits, then they're going to be less inclined to, again, recognize and appreciate what philosophy has to offer. Okay, and so that's what he says on page 56 when he says, quote, "It is exclusively among the goods of the mind that the value of philosophy is to be found. And only those who are not indifferent to these goods can be persuaded that the study of philosophy is not a waste of time." So it has a very kind of specific type of benefit, right? A mental sort of benefit. Again, its benefits aren't as, say, tangible as some of these other disciplines. And then we already mentioned this earlier, maybe one of the most noteworthy features of philosophy is that it doesn't seem to generate definitive answers. Russell's account of the value of philosophy raises an interesting question. If it's true, as he suggests, that philosophy rarely, if ever, yields definitive answers, then that raises the question, in what sense does philosophy actually offer any knowledge at all? And the next module will turn our attention to that issue.